Up next in the broadcast, the Bank of Korea makes its third rate cut in less than a year, leaving the nation's key interest rate at a record low of 1.75%. A hacker who claims to possess sensitive data on the country's nuclear power plants threatens to sell the information to other countries unless the Korean government hands over an unspecified amount of money. And Iraqi security forces continue their biggest offensive to date against Islamic State militants in Tikrit. The hometown of former dictator Saddam Hussein was seized by the terror group last June. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News live from Seoul. I am Kang Chery.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We begin with the latest move to revive the lagging economy. Korea's central bank cut its key rate to an historic low of 1.75%.
The Bank of Korea cited the weak recovery momentum for its third cut in less than a year, adding that it could hurt the country's growth potential.
We drew the conclusion that the pace of recovery in domestic demand is not meeting our forecast for January. And since we agree on the downside risks, we thought it was better to act preemptively.
And to go in depth on this story, Professor Yang Jun-suk and our BOK correspondent Hwang Jae are joining us here in the studio. Welcome to you both.
Happy to be here.
I'm going to throw the first question to you, Professor. What did you think of the timing and the degree of this latest cut?
Okay, the timing was a bit of a surprise. I think most analysts did not expect the cut to take place at this meeting. Now, as to the effectiveness, we've had some rate cuts in the past. I expect the effect to be roughly the same. But hopefully, maybe this will have a bit of an extra kick because, first of all, the announcement was a surprise. And secondly, this is the lowest rate that Korea has ever been to. So maybe there's going to be a psychological effect. But as far as the pure economic effects are concerned, I think this is just another 0.25 rate cut. It has been not as effective as we wanted, but it seemed to have some positive effects. So I think we could look forward to about the same amount of help.
And actually, the two previous rate cuts, there has been criticism about the two rate cuts that it didn't really impact on boosting consumption or investment, as sluggish demand is mainly stemming from the structural problems within the country. So how much can a rate cut really accomplish, Professor? Okay,
well, I think the monetary policy has lost a lot of its kick because Korea has such a high household debt. And, well, if you don't have a lot of consumption, then companies are reluctant to invest even with low interest rate. So I think that's why the kick from the monetary policy hasn't been as effective as we saw maybe 3-4 years ago. So in that sense, as I mentioned, I'm not expecting miracles from this rate cut, but hopefully it'll have about as much positive effect as the last few rates did, because that did have some effect on the real estate market. And while it may not have helped as much as everybody expected, it seems to be helping some.
So speaking of household debt, with the lower interest rates, critics say that it'll encourage people to borrow even more. But then on the other hand, some people say lower rates means people who have borrowed money can pay back their loans in a more easy fashion. What's your take on the future outlook of that? Okay, well, I'm not expecting too much help on reducing the interest rate debt because, well, you need to refinance to really get help from that. And because people have made their loans already at the past interest rate, I don't think it's going to be of help for the very short run. Actually, though, it might help for the government to borrow money because now they'll be borrowing money at a lower interest rate. So if the government do decide to go into further deficit financing, this will probably help
in that front.
And this is certainly sort of joining the global trend, I would say. 18 countries, was it, just so far this year, have cut or conducted some kind of quantitative easing. So is this engaging in some sort of currency war? What's the pulse that you got from the press briefing today?
Well, the BOK governor refused to say that the central bank is now in the so-called currency war, adding that it's not trimming the key rate to counteract the global monetary spree, but it's acting to tackle the sluggish domestic demand. But local exporters, of course, are welcoming the surprise move, saying that it will raise the country's price competitiveness in the global market.
And we saw the Korean won hit a 19-month low yesterday. Why was that? And does the U.S. Fed hike that's anticipated to be coming up have any effect?
Yeah, actually, the changes in exchange rate concern me a bit more than the current rate cut, because it's been moving at around 10 won per day on some days. So that's really a large amount of change in a very short period of time. Partially, well, the newspapers say that it's because U.S. has announced or is expecting a rate cut faster than it expected. They were originally expecting interest rate increase in the United States to be in September. Now some are speculating that it's going to be in June. But so far, at least, Janet Yellen, the head of Fed, has been saying that they're going to delay the rate increase as much as possible. So unless the market seems to be saying that Yellen is lying, I don't think that should be too much of a worry. So I'm concerned about what exactly is making the rates change so quickly.
Janet Yellen will be communicating with the market closely enough, but I think with this possibility of a rate hike by the Fed down the road in the coming months, there are concerns of a potential capital outflow, massive capital outflow out of South Korea. What's your take?
Okay, well, if you had asked me this question, say, last summer, I would have been very worried. Right now, I'm not as worried because, well, we had these rates cuts already twice last year, and what we saw was that there really wasn't that much of a capital outflow. And while the United States is thinking about interest rate increase, all the other countries have either lowered their interest rate or they're engaged in quantitative easing. So all the other countries are going to have the same problem if there's going to be a problem at all. So Korea is not acting alone.
And just to add to that, in last month's monthly monetary policy meeting minutes, one of the policymakers said that Korea is now less affected by the Fed's rate hike. But the central banker actually said today that it's hard to draw a conclusion, of course, on that issue, adding that it will keep a close eye on the Federal Reserve and, of course, the global capital outflows.
Yeah, it's important to remember, I think we're still in a very uncharted ground. This has been the biggest global recession since the 1930s Great Depression, and this has been a lot of countries, a lot of advanced countries are going through the liquidity trap. So this really is an unexplored ground, and we're sort of feeling our way in the dark.
So what is your outlook moving forward with this continued expansionary policy by the BOK?
Okay, well, I think because of the large household debt, because of the global recession, I'm sorry to say that the kick from this interest rate cut will not be as much as people hope. I hope I'm wrong, but given the experience of the last two rate cuts, I think that we can only reasonably expect a very moderate effect. What I wish would have happened was, even though the Bank of Korea may not like this because it may encroach on their independence, I was hoping that the government and the Bank of Korea perhaps got together and created a more comprehensive plan, or at least announced all their plans together, so that it seems like the government has their act together and they're really behind the expansionary policy.
All right, all right. Now, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Jiha and Professor Yang, for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The nuclear reactor hacker who last Christmas threatened to shut down some of Korea's nuclear power plants is back.
And this time he or she is demanding money for not handing over sensitive data to third countries. Connie Kim has the details.
The hacker that threatened to shut down Korea's nuclear facilities last year has come back with a fresh threat. Using the same Twitter account, the hacker demanded money and warned that countries from Northern Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America want to buy Korea's nuclear reactor information. There was no specified amount for the payout, but the message did say nuclear authorities should send an email to the stated address if it's willing to take the offer. Along with the threat, more than 20 files were released, including floor maps and transcript of a phone conversation between President Park Geun-hye and United Nations Security General Ban Ki-moon. An official from the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Company said it's looking into how the information got leaked and how sensitive the released documents are. The threat comes about 3 months after the hacker threatened to destroy power plants if the company didn't halt operations at 3 of Korea's nuclear facilities by Christmas last year. No destruction was done to the reactors even after the shutdown deadline, and the nuclear power company had insisted the released data posed no threat. However, the hacker's comeback is raising concerns as a person behind the nuclear power hack still hasn't been identified, even after months of investigation. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye is scheduled to hold a three-way meeting with the leaders of Korea's ruling and opposition parties next Tuesday. The president is expected to talk about achievements from her recent Middle East trip and seek party cooperation, especially on the economic front. This will be the first time the president will sit down with the leaders of both parties since Moon Jae-in, her presidential election rival, was elected as the opposition party leader last month. President Park Geun-hye says Koreans have a responsibility and a mission to end the 70-year division of the Korean peninsula and to open an era of inter-Korean unification for future generations. Speaking at a commissioning ceremony for new military officers Thursday, the president said the fundamental foundation of that mission is strong national security. And referring to the ever-changing security situation in Northeast Asia, President Park asked the Korean military to innovate and to become more creative in leading the country's unification efforts.
The word out of Washington is that the recently appointed U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter will pay a visit to Korea sometime next month, and Secretary of State John Kerry may also come to Korea, though on a separate trip. Our Lee Ji-yoon has more.
Two top U.S. officials are likely to fly out to Seoul next month. This is according to Korea-based Yonhap news agency on Wednesday, citing diplomatic sources in Washington. U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter and Secretary of State John Kerry are reportedly planning separate trips to Northeast Asia in April, including stops in South Korea and Japan. Their visits come ahead of President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's planned trips to Washington this year. As to what Carter is planning to do while he's here, the report says he's likely to talk about stepping up cooperation between Seoul and Washington to deter North Korean nuclear threats. The focus is also on whether or not he will talk about the issue of deploying an advanced U.S. missile defense system called THAAD to South Korea. Supporters claim deploying the system would better protect the country against North Korea's ballistic missiles, while opponents say it would only worsen relations with China and Russia. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is also expected to make a stop in Seoul sometime next month. Yonhap sources say that while he's here, Kerry's likely to address any remaining issues surrounding last week's attack on U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Mark Lippert by an anti-U.S. activist. Kerry may also discuss ways to strengthen ties between Seoul and Washington in the wake of the attack on the U.S. ambassador. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
Japan is expected to extend its own sanctions against North Korea by 2 more years. According to Japanese news outlets, Tokyo will decide by the end of this month after receiving approvals from its political parties. The sanctions, set to expire mid-April, have banned trade with North Korea and North Korean vessels from entering into Japanese ports since 2006. Japan had partially lifted its sanctions when North Korea set up a special investigation committee last July to re-examine cases of Japanese abductees by North Korea. However, North Korea has not yet notified Japan of the results of the investigation. BBC is reportedly reviewing plans to provide a radio news service for people in North Korea. Citing a spokesperson from the British broadcaster, The Telegraph reports that BBC is looking into ways to set up a special news channel in Pyongyang. The report added, however, the plan is in its infant stage of development and that it could take years before any service is up and running.
Nobel Prize-winning author Kenzaburo Oe has sharply criticized Japan for not fully apologizing to Korea over past atrocities. Speaking at a forum held in Seoul Thursday, the prominent Japanese writer said Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who did not experience the Second World War, cannot even imagine the horrific crimes that Japan had committed during wartime. The 80-year-old author, who experienced the war during his childhood, urged Japan to deeply reflect on its past. Mr. Oe is Japan's second Nobel laureate in literature who was given the honor in 1994. Another major leak at Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant earlier this week may have raised radiation levels in nearby waters. Plant operator Tokyo Electric Power Company told Seoul-based Yonhap News that the radiation levels in water collected on Wednesday were 30 times higher than the sample collected on Monday. TEPCO said earlier this week that nearly 750 tons of contaminated rainwater had escaped the plant and likely made its way into the ground. Iraqi security forces are continuing their offensive against Islamic State militants as they make crucial gains to retake the city of Tikrit.
For more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, this battle for Tikrit began more than a week ago. What's the latest update from the front lines there?
Well, there's been reports of heavy rocket and gunfire as Iraqi troops backed by Shia militia are trying to reach the center of Tikrit. And though they're facing tough resistance, all indications show the momentum is in their favor. If they are successful in this operation, it will be a psychologically important victory, but also mark the next step in ousting IS from the region. Arirang's Kim Min-ji reports.
Iraqi security forces and militias pushed toward major landmarks in the city of Tikrit on Wednesday in their biggest offensive so far against the group that calls itself Islamic State. Joint Iraqi forces raised the national flag above a military hospital, one of the latest installations retaken from the militants. Soldiers took out snipers and had to defuse roadside bombs and booby-trap buildings. Citing the head of a key paramilitary force, CNN reports that government troops are now in control of 75% of the city. Tikrit, which is the hometown of former dictator Saddam Hussein, was seized by Islamic State militants last June in a lightning advance. The military offensive that began early this month includes a combined force of up to 30,000 troops. If Iraqi forces regain full control of the city, it will give them the momentum to retake the Islamic State-held city of Mosul, which is 10 times bigger than Tikrit. In an apparent retaliation, Islamic State militants launched a fierce assault in the western Iraqi city of Ramadi. It involved more than a dozen suicide car bomb attacks. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Turning to Russia now, a member of Moscow's Human Rights Council says one of the suspects charged in the murder of opposition leader Boris Nemtsov may have been forced into a confession. Andrei Babuskin said he'd spotted numerous wounds on the body of Tsar Dadayev, the man who had earlier confessed to being involved in the Moscow shooting. While in prison, Dadayev also said that he was starved and left hooded until his court appearance, and even accused authorities of using electricity to torture him. Meanwhile, the European Union called on Russia to conduct a transparent investigation and to end what it called a climate of hatred.
Russian authorities have not only the duty to conduct a full and transparent investigation into the murder of Boris, they also have to put an end to the climate of suspicion, hatred and intolerance for diversity of opinion.
Russia's powerful investigative committee immediately pushed back, accusing Babushkin of meddling in a criminal case. Nepsov, who was one of President Putin's fiercest critics, was shot dead in an open street near the Kremlin on February 27th. And some shocking news from the U.S. town of Ferguson. 2 police officers have been seriously injured after being shot by an unknown gunman. St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmar said both men were conscious and being treated at a local hospital. The shooting took place on Thursday during a protest outside the Ferguson Police Department. Although starting out peacefully, pandemonium erupted when several gunshots rang out into the night. There's been conflicting accounts coming from the scene. Activists there said the shooter was far away atop on a hill, but police claim the attacker was standing within the angry crowd.
Until about midnight. At midnight, the crowd was starting to break up. In fact, several of the officers had left the area, and to the immediate northwest of the Ferguson Police Department, several shots were fired, at least 3. And 2 officers were struck. A St. Louis County officer was struck in the shoulder, and a Webster Groves police officer was struck in the face.
The shooting came just hours after Ferguson's police chief Thomas Jackson announced his resignation. He was one of the many local officials to quit this week following the release of a scathing report by the Justice Department that found widespread racial discrimination within the city's police force and court system. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello everyone, I'm Stephen Che with the Sports Brief. Football star Chaduri announced in January that he was retiring from the national team, but South Korea manager Uli Stilica has called him out for one last dance. Cha said that he spoke with manager Stilica about playing in the friendly against New Zealand on March 31st, adding that the head coach urged him to retire on a winning note in front of the home fans. The veteran may be enticed to oblige, especially after losing to Australia in the Asian Cup final in his last match. It's likely Cha will take the field and wrap up his international career with a hero's farewell. Over to the KBL for the playoff matchup between the Goyang Orions and the LG Sakers. The Orions built a big lead early but went into the half up by a mere 2 points. To the final minutes of the 4th quarter, Kim Shide sank the clutch shot to seal the comeback for LG, and the Sakers take the 2-1 series lead and are a win away from advancing to the semifinals. Over to pro volleyball. First to the ladies, the Korea Ginseng Corporation took down the Korea Expressway Zenith in the 5-setter. Joyce Silva was dominant, leading the last place KGC to a rare victory. And over to the men in a possible championship preview, the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs swept the OK Savings Bank Russian Cash. Still, it's tough to call as both teams rested their star attackers. Finally, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao went face-to-face for the first and last time before their mega fight on May 2nd. The undefeated Mayweather called it the fight the world can't miss. Pacquiao, an 8th division champ, said it was important for boxing history. With the fight on after 5 years, the world's best pound-for-pound boxers expressed joy in finally being able to bring it to the fans. The bout will be the richest ever, with a purse expected to be at least $250 million. That's all I have for now. Your weather's up next. Good night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the Weather Outlook. Temperatures are finally back to seasonal averages, and earlier today we got to enjoy comfortable weather conditions. However, as you can see, rain clouds are gradually moving in. So through early tomorrow morning, expect about 5 millimeters of precipitation for Seoul, and this means snow in places where the mercury drops. So 1 to 3 centimeters of snow is forecast for parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces. Hopefully tomorrow, snow showers could relieve the dry dryness. But as for now, humidity index in parts of Chungcheongbuk-do province have dipped to 14%. Looking ahead, moderate conditions are in store over the weekend, but keep in mind the big gap in numbers from day to night. On to the readings. Seoul reaches a high of 9, Daegu and Busan 12. Meanwhile, Jeju reaches up to 16, Dokdo 7, Mount Kumgang -5. That's all I have for you now, but I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Bo-kyung, and that's Primetime News for this Thursday. I am Kang Chery. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.